I woke before the sun had risen, the pale light of December filtering weakly through my curtains. The weather forecast had been relentless for days. Heavy snow across upstate New York, dangerous driving conditions, warnings from the state troopers. I stood at my kitchen window with a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching flakes spin in the wind like ash. Most people would have called it madness to even consider driving through a storm like this. But it wasn't just another day. It was my brother's wedding, and no matter how complicated things were between us, I told myself I needed to be there. The espresso machine I had saved months to buy sat boxed near the door. I had gone without extras, no dinners out, no new clothes, just so I could afford it. My friend Ruth had asked the night before, 9 hours in a snowstorm? You must really love your family. I laughed, though it was a laugh that caught in my throat. It's not just love, I told her. It's duty. It's hope. She gave me a look that carried both pity and doubt. I loaded the car, tucked the gift securely in the back seat, and pressed my gloved hands to the cold steering wheel. Maybe this time, I whispered to myself, they'll finally see me. The first miles on the highway were manageable, just slush under the tires. But as Albany disappeared behind me, the snow thickened, swallowing visibility. The wipers fought hard, screeching against ice, their rhythm frantic but never fast enough. Semi-trucks loomed out of the white curtain and vanished again, some sliding as they tried to brake. I leaned forward, knuckles white on the wheel. The storm roared around me, and I thought of all the times I had been present in body, but erased in spirit. Family dinners where my stories were cut short. Birthdays where my achievements drew silence while my sister's smallest wins drew applause. Family is supposed to be your safe harbor, not the storm itself, I muttered, the phrase borrowed from a counselor I once heard on a radio show. At a gas station near Syracuse, I refueled, snow stinging my face as I fumbled with the pump. My phone buzzed endlessly with notifications, group chat updates about flowers, champagne, the rehearsal dinner. Not a single message addressed to me. I scrolled, hoping someone might notice my drive, maybe ask if I was safe. Nothing, just pictures of dresses and plates of shrimp cocktails. I shoved the phone back into my coat pocket and forced myself to keep going. The miles dragged, each one heavy, but determination carried me through. I told myself, if I survive this storm, maybe they'll realize I belong at their table. By the time I reached Buffalo, my body ached from tension. My coat was crusted with road salt, my boots soaked through. I dragged my suitcase and the large gift bag into the lobby of the hotel where the reception was set. Glittering chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors. Guests swirled in elegant gowns and tuxedos, laughter filling the air. I felt like a ghost crossing a ballroom I wasn't invited to enter. Before I could get my bearings, a security guard stepped into my path. "Staff entrance is in the back," he said firmly, his tone automatic, as though it had been rehearsed countless times. I froze, clutching the gift bag tighter. "I'm not staff," I said, forcing a polite smile though my cheeks burned. "I'm family." The man blinked, mumbled an apology, and stepped aside. But the sting remained. Humiliation, subtle but sharp, cut through me. I thought, not for the first time, how easy it was for people to see me as someone who didn't belong. Inside the main hall, bridesmaids clustered together, their dresses gleaming, their voices lilting with inside jokes. Relatives I hadn't seen in years embraced each other with warmth. No one turned toward me. No one reached for a hug or even a handshake. I carried the heavy espresso machine like a waiter balancing a tray. Finally, a cousin I barely knew glanced my way. "Oh, you made it! Wow, you drove in this storm?" "Yes," I said, smiling with effort. 9 hours. Just wanted to be here for him." She tilted her head. "Well, bless your heart. The caterers must be grateful too." She laughed lightly, as though it were charming, but her confusion stung. I chuckled softly, using humor as armor. "Apparently my family thinks I come with trays of appetizers." Her laugh lingered as she turned back to her group, leaving me standing alone. I shifted the gift awkwardly from one arm to the other. Not a single person offered to help. I walked further into the hall, the espresso machine knocking against my leg with each step. Around me, the ballroom glowed with golden light, champagne flutes clinking. I felt the familiar prickle of invisibility crawl up my spine. And then I saw it, the seating chart, elegantly framed near the entrance. My chest tightened as I hesitated, fingers trembling. 9 hours through a storm, months of saving for the gift, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd have a place that mattered. I stepped closer, heart pounding. But when I leaned closer, I whispered to myself, I realized something was terribly wrong. I stood in front of the seating chart, the espresso machine's handle cutting into my hand as I held it too tightly. The frame gleamed under the soft light of the chandeliers, each card perfectly lined up, gold trim catching the glow. Every name looked elegant, each guest neatly placed in their designated spot, except mine. My eyes moved down, searching once, then again, heart pounding harder each time. At the bottom, squeezed into a corner in rushed handwriting, was my name. Not typed, not styled, not even centered, just scribbled like an afterthought. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe the printer broke. Maybe they ran out of time. I whispered under my breath, maybe it's just an oversight. But before I could hold on to that fragile thought, one of the bridesmaids passed by, her glossy hair bouncing as she leaned in. She smirked, tilting her head toward my name. Guess someone forgot to include you on time. She let out a short laugh before walking away, the scent of her perfume lingering like a slap. I forced a smile, even though it didn't reach my eyes. Right, I muttered to myself, just late. But deep down I knew it wasn't late. It was deliberate. My name looked like graffiti scribbled in the margins of a family portrait. I pulled my shoulders back and stepped inside the ballroom. The transformation was dizzying. Golden tablecloths stretched across round tables, champagne glasses sparkled under the chandeliers, a string quartet played softly in the corner. Guests mingled with practiced ease, their laughter mingling with the music. Everywhere I looked, people were introduced with titles, their importance paraded. This is Mark's college roommate. That's the CEO who helped him land the promotion. She's one of Jada's law firm partners. Each person was neatly categorized, their role celebrated. Me. I drifted in without introduction, no one taking notice. It was as if I had slipped through a side door, a ghost wearing a navy dress still damp from snow. I clutched the gift tighter, its weight digging into my wrist, reminding me I was still here, though unseen. I thought, it's not just about a chair, it's about where they place you in their world. The saying I'd once read in a self-help book floated into my mind. Actions speak louder than words. Their action had already spoken. I wasn't part of this celebration, not truly. I tried to shake off the sting, but then a distant cousin spotted me. She walked over, her smile polite but thin. Oh, you came. We weren't sure you'd make it in this weather. I forced a polite tone. Yes, 9 hours on icy roads, but I made it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, almost amused. Well, bless your heart. The caterers must be grateful too. She laughed, tapping her wine glass as if she'd just shared a clever joke. I laughed too, but it was hollow. Apparently, I look like I deliver shrimp cocktails. She gave a shrug and wandered back to her group, leaving me alone in the crowd again. I made my way toward the gift table, hoping for something mundane to ground me. As I bent to place the espresso machine down, another guest, dressed in a sharp suit, waved me over without looking directly at me. Could you bring another glass of wine? I straightened slowly, staring at him. I'm family, I said evenly. He blinked, embarrassed, chuckled awkwardly. Oh, sorry, didn't know. Then he turned away, already forgetting me. I let out a long breath, the humiliation pressing down like the ceiling had lowered just above my head. I glanced at the espresso machine, gleaming under the lights, a gift worth more than I could easily afford. It looked wrong on that table, as out of place as I felt in this room. I found a quiet spot near a column and leaned against it, my chest tight. My mind drifted back to other times, birthdays where my cake came last, reunions where I was asked to take photos but never in them, dinners where my updates were met with silence while every ear turned to my sister's stories. They never had to say I didn't belong, I thought. Their actions shouted it. I glanced around the ballroom again. Guests clapped at a toast. Someone lifted a glass to laughter. Another relative pulled out their phone to record a video. My presence didn't shift a single heartbeat in that room. I remembered a quote I once saw scribbled on a cafe chalkboard. The worst feeling is not being alone, it's being ignored in a crowd. And standing there, invisible in the middle of family and strangers, I felt the truth of those words more sharply than ever. The humiliation settled differently this time, not as a wound, but as fuel. Quiet anger curled inside me. For the first time, I wondered if maybe being invisible wasn't my burden anymore, but their failure. I turned back toward the chart one last time, staring at my name scribbled in the corner like a correction made too late. 9 hours through a storm, I whispered, and this is all I mean to them. The scribbled name stared back at me long after I'd stepped away from the chart. The careless ink pulled me backward, into memories I thought I'd buried. I tightened my grip on my coat and let the noise of the ballroom fade. I was no longer in Buffalo. I was 15 again, staring at the kids' table at a Thanksgiving dinner that seemed to last forever. I remembered balancing a flimsy paper plate on my lap while my cousins jabbered around me. My sister, radiant even then, sat at the main table, her glass raised as she gave a toast that made the adults clap with admiration. I sat on a folding chair pushed against the wall, trying not to spill soda on my dress. One uncle leaned over and patted my shoulder. "Don't worry," he said kindly but thoughtlessly. "You'll sit with the adults when you're older." Older never came. Every year, the kids' table just grew smaller until eventually I was the only one left, stuck between the noise of the kitchen and the glow of the dining room, invisible in both. Now, at 32, staring at my name scrawled at the bottom of the chart, I realized that kids' table had only changed its shape. This ballroom was just another version of it, my first toilet chair. I looked around the glamorous room, golden light spilling across polished floors, champagne flutes clinking, music curling through the air. People laughed, linked arms, posed for photos. Yet all I could think was, I am still that child, always shoved to the side. The contrast burned deeper the more I let myself compare. Then, paper plates and plastic forks. Now, crystal goblets and silver knives. Then, a folding chair near the kitchen. Now, another chair by the restroom. The furniture changed, but my placement never did. I whispered Maya Angelou's words, half to myself, half to the ghost of my younger self. People may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Tonight, I felt the same ache I had carried since childhood, an ache that never left because the treatment never changed. I tried to shake off the memories, but humiliation has a way of sticking to the skin. I picked up my gift bag, hoping movement might distract me, and walked toward the coat check. Just as I set the heavy bag down, a man in a tailored suit appeared beside me, his eyes on the waitstaff circulating nearby. Without looking too closely, he handed me an empty plate. "Could you grab another one for me?" I stared at him, the absurdity hitting me like ice water. "I'm family, not staff," I said flatly. He blinked, startled, and then gave a nervous laugh. "Oh, my mistake. Sorry about that." He walked away quickly, embarrassment flushing his face, but the damage was already done. I stood frozen, the words echoing louder than the string quartet, easier to mistake for staff than family. The espresso machine gleamed under the coat check lights, and for the first time, I saw it differently, not as a generous gift, but as a paycheck handed to an employee. My sacrifice didn't look like love. It looked like service. I took the bag back into my hands, clutching it against my chest like armor, and searched for a quiet corner. I found a spot near a pillar where no one would notice me, which felt cruelly fitting. From there, I watched. One aunt kissed my sister's cheek, whispering something that made her laugh. A group of cousins lifted glasses in a circle, their cheer carrying over the music. Even distant relatives were welcomed with hugs and warmth, as though their very presence brought joy. No one turned toward me, no one reached out. And it struck me with brutal clarity. This wasn't about seating, or charts, or chairs. It was about erasure. Every small slight tonight was proof of a deeper truth, that my place in this family had always been conditional, and conditional meant fragile, dispensable. I closed my eyes and whispered inside my head, I drove 9 hours through a storm for this. They didn't even expect me. Maybe they didn't want me. The nostalgia that had once softened my memories hardened into something else, a quiet anger that pulsed like a drumbeat. I pressed my coat tighter around me, anchoring myself. Across the room, my sister's friends circled around her, showering her with adoration. I stood still, watching, and realized the worst part wasn't being overlooked tonight. It was the knowledge that I had always been placed on the margins, and they never once thought it was wrong. I stood near the entrance, pretending to adjust the strap of my bag when I caught voices behind me. Their tone was low, but the words were sharp enough to pierce through the music. "No wonder she's not included," one woman said with a chuckle that carried. "She's always been the odd one out." Her companion, a man in a pressed suit, added without hesitation, "Her sister shines. She just fades into the background." They laughed softly, thinking their cruelty was hidden. But the laughter echoed in my head louder than the quartet playing on stage. I froze, my pulse racing, every syllable branding me in a way no scribbled name ever could. It wasn't just my family who thought this way. Outsiders had absorbed the same story, that I was expendable, forgettable, a shadow standing in the corner of every photograph. I clenched my jaw, biting back the tears. Instead of sadness, a sharper emotion rose. Anger. So this is what they really think, I told myself. Not just them, everyone. I turned slightly, catching a glimpse of their faces. They looked perfectly at ease, sipping champagne and smiling at their clever cruelty. I wanted to walk over, slam the truth into their smugness, but I swallowed the impulse. I knew that if I let rage lead, they would win again. So I straightened, pulled my coat tighter across my chest, and walked deeper into the ballroom. The air smelled of flowers and roasted meat, but as I wound through the tables, another scent overwhelmed me. Bleach. The sharp tang of cleaning supplies drew me toward the far wall, and that's when I saw it. My chair. It wasn't at a table. It wasn't even tucked neatly beside one. It stood alone, a metal folding chair wobbling slightly on uneven carpet, shoved next to the restroom doors. Staff hurried in and out carrying trays of glasses, bumping the chair each time. Guests walked past, avoiding the area as though it didn't belong to the elegance of the hall. I stopped, stunned, staring at the slip of paper taped across the back. My name, in the same rushed handwriting from the chart. "Are you fine here?" a bridesmaid asked, her smile sweet, but her eyes darting away as if she knew. My lips curved upward, but my voice betrayed me. "Fine." The word cracked like porcelain in my mouth. She nodded and hurried off, not waiting for a real answer. I lowered myself into the seat, and the legs trembled under my weight. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unstable. Like my position in this family, always one bump away from collapse. Each time the restroom door opened, a wave of cold air swept across my arms. Every tray carried past me rattled with glasses, the clink sounding like mock applause. A few guests glanced in my direction, their faces twitching with pity, then turning away quickly. No one offered a solution. No one insisted I move closer to the head table. The humiliation wasn't private, it was on display, undeniable. I shifted, crossing my arms over my chest. The chair wobbled again. This isn't just oversight, I thought. This is a message. I forced myself to look across the room. The head table glowed beneath cascading flowers and tall candles. My sister laughed, radiant in her dress, surrounded by relatives and friends. Distant cousins I barely remembered clinked glasses with her. My parents beamed like royalty presenting their crown jewel. And I, her sister who had crossed 9 hours of snow, sat by the restroom. A phrase I once heard on a late-night talk show slipped into my mind. Respect is a two-way street. If they don't give it, don't stay standing in traffic. I repeated it silently, letting the truth of it fill me. For years, I had stood in that traffic, hoping they'd stop the car. They never did. Tonight, I felt the impact fully. A waiter brushing past bumped my arm, nearly toppling the chair. Sorry, he muttered, hurrying off. I smiled weakly. It's okay. But inside, the words were different. I don't belong here. The realization stung, but it also steeled me. If this was where they wanted me, then they would soon see I wasn't willing to stay seated. I ran my hands along the folded coat on my lap, feeling the seams, as though checking armor before a battle. My whisper was so faint, no one else could hear. If they push me any further tonight, I will not stay seated. It wasn't a threat I intended to voice out loud, not yet, but it was the first vow I made to myself in years. Not to accept, not to excuse, not to let this pass quietly into another night of just how it is. I glanced at my sister across the room. She was radiant, adored, bathed in light. For a second, I wondered if she didn't see me at all, or if she saw me clearly and preferred me right where I was. Either way, the next insult would be the last straw. I lowered myself reluctantly into the metal chair by the restroom, pulling my coat tighter around me to shield myself from the draft that swept in every time the door swung open. The chair wobbled beneath me, creaking each time a waiter brushed past carrying trays of wine glasses. I adjusted my posture, trying to make myself smaller, but it didn't matter. This spot wasn't hidden. It was a spotlight of shame. Laughter carried across the ballroom. Toasts rose from the head table, crystal glasses catching the golden light. I sat alone, the hum of the restroom door punctuating every cheer. Guests walked by, their expressions shifting when they realized who I was. Is that the sister? I heard one whisper. Another leaned in closer. Why would they put her there? Their words cut deeper than the cold air wafting from the restroom. I gripped the water glass in front of me and took a slow sip, wishing the coolness would steady me. Instead, it only highlighted how visible my isolation had become. I was both unseen and too exposed, a contradiction I had lived with for years. I shifted again, and my eyes caught something on the chair itself. A small white sticker, slightly crooked, peeling at one edge. 3 words stamped in bold letters. Table overflow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't an accident, wasn't just a forgotten name on a chart. It was official. I wasn't part of the family's celebration. I was excess, the spillover no one planned for. A bridesmaid passed, her dress swishing, her perfume clouding the air. I stopped her. Why does my chair have this sticker? She froze, her eyes darting away. Oh, don't worry, it's just a detail. Her laugh was high-pitched, brittle. She hurried off before I could respond. Just a detail, I murmured to myself, pressing my lips tight. That detail shouted louder than anything else in the room. It was a brand, a scarlet letter pinned to me for everyone to see. I let my gaze drift to the head table. My sister shone there, radiant under the fairy lights. She leaned toward my parents as they toasted, her laughter spilling across the hall. Relatives clapped, cousins cheered, even distant acquaintances leaned in for photos with her. None of them looked my way. None of them acknowledged the absurdity of where I sat. My humiliation wasn't just private, it was sanctioned. They didn't just forget me, I thought bitterly. They erased me, publicly. A saying I once read floated into my mind. Sometimes silence isn't golden, it's just abandonment. And that's exactly what this felt like. Not one person spoke for me. Their silence became complicity. A waiter bumped my chair again. Sorry, he muttered. I smiled weakly. It's fine. But inside, my patience was cracking. My calm exterior disguised the rage building beneath. I folded my napkin slowly, carefully, like a ritual. Each crease was deliberate, an act of defiance no one else would understand. If this is where they want me, I told myself, they'll regret underestimating me. I laid the napkin flat, my hand steady now. It wasn't about leaving quietly anymore. It was about leaving my mark. I breathed in deeply, the smell of bleach mixing with roasted meat and flowers. My hands no longer trembled. The humiliation hadn't broken me, it had shifted something. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as I pushed it back slightly. The sound cut through the chatter, sharp and deliberate. Heads turned for a moment before swiveling back toward the laughter at the main table. They put me in the shadows. I thought, standing straighter. But soon, they'll have to look directly at me. I wandered toward the gift table, hoping for a small moment of relief. My coat was folded neatly over my arm, the sting of the restroom seat still raw. I thought maybe if I saw the espresso machine, my sacrifice, my offering, it would remind me I still mattered here. I scanned the line of shiny wrapped boxes and bows until I saw it. My gift. Heavy, practical, and costly in ways no one else would ever know. A couple nearby admired it. "That's a nice one," the man said to his wife. "Must be from someone important." I leaned closer to the tag, my stomach twisting. The words stopped me cold. It didn't say my name. Instead, in bold, neat lettering, from college friend of the groom. For a long moment, I stared, frozen, as though the letters themselves were knives. Then I found my voice. I caught the attention of a young staff member arranging envelopes nearby. "Excuse me," I said carefully. "This is my gift." "Why does it say it's from someone else?" He blinked, looking nervous, and lowered his voice. "Oh, your brother asked us to keep the labeling consistent with the others. That's how he wanted it done." I repeated his words back, slow, tasting the betrayal. "My brother asked you to put someone else's name on my gift." The boy shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just following instructions." He turned back to his work as though my shock were an inconvenience. I pressed my palm against the table, steadying myself. The espresso machine sat there gleaming, no longer a symbol of my care but of their theft. Months of sacrifice, my skipped dinners, the long freelance nights, erased with the stroke of a pen. Inside my chest, something snapped. It wasn't just the chair, not just the whispers. They were writing me out of the story, piece by piece. I told myself firmly, if you don't stand up for yourself, they'll write you out completely. I swallowed, forcing my breathing to steady. Around me, guests laughed, chatting obliviously, glasses clinking. None of them saw me holding myself together like shattered glass. I stepped back, deliberately, choosing silence not as surrender, but as strategy. Exploding here would only feed them, confirm what they whispered, that I was dramatic, unstable. But in my silence, a vow took shape. Erase me from the table, from the seating, from the gifts, but I will not be erased entirely. Not this time. A voice broke into my thoughts. "I saw where they sat you." I turned, startled, to find my cousin Mayless approaching, her phone clutched in hand. We hadn't spoken much in years, not since she'd also been edged out of holiday gatherings for being too different. Her eyes carried the same mixture of pity and rage I felt boiling in myself. She lowered her voice. "It's wrong." I exhaled shakily. "It's always been like this." Her lips tightened, and she glanced toward the head table before turning her screen to me. On it was a photo she'd snapped earlier, my chair by the restroom, sticker and all, table overflow. "Then let's make sure it's remembered," she said. I stared at the picture, my throat tightening. There it was, proof. Not in my head, not paranoia, not me being sensitive. Evidence. My humiliation captured in pixels, undeniable. For the first time that night, a flicker of validation warmed me. Someone had seen. Someone stood with me, even if just quietly. I whispered, "Maybe my story doesn't end at that chair." Mayless touched my arm. "Maybe it begins there." The noise of the ballroom swirled around us, the string quartet, the hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from the main table. But it all dulled against the clarity of that photo glowing in my hands. I tucked the image into my phone, my pulse quickening. If they stripped me of my seat, my gift, my name, then I would strip away their illusion. I lifted my head and looked across the ballroom. My brother was laughing at the head table, champagne glass raised, basking in a glow built partly on my erasure. He was untouched by the storm he had caused. "They think I'm invisible," I told myself, a new fire in my chest. "They're about to see how wrong they are." I lifted my eyes toward the head table, searching instinctively for my mother's face. I wanted her to see me, even just once that night, for her to look at me and say without words that she noticed where I'd been placed, what I'd endured. For a heartbeat, our gazes met. I held my breath. But just as quickly, she turned away. She leaned toward my sister, smoothing the lace along her veil, brushing a strand of hair back, adjusting her gown as if nothing else in the room existed. I sat frozen beside the restroom, the smell of bleach heavy in the air, while across the hall my mother fussed over her star daughter. The thought hit me, sharp as glass. Not even tonight. She won't stand up for me, not even once. A quote I once read rose unbidden. Sometimes the people you'd take a bullet for are the ones behind the trigger. And that was how it felt. My mother's glance, her deliberate turning away, was a bullet I hadn't seen coming, even after years of practice. It was my last fragile hope snapping clean in two. Her eyes, those I had searched for since childhood, had given me the final answer. I was not to be claimed. The glitter of the hall blurred for a moment, my throat tightening, my hands trembling in my lap. The betrayal didn't scream. It settled like a stone in my chest, a weight that meant something irreversible had happened. The turning away of a mother's gaze was more than indifference. It was disownment. I let out a long breath, but before I could gather myself, I saw him. My brother. He left the head table, weaving through guests, his champagne glass still in hand. For a second, I thought, naively, that he had come to check on me. That despite everything, he might at least acknowledge me. Why was my gift relabeled? I asked the moment he stopped beside me. My voice shook, but the words were firm. He glanced down at me, irritation flickering across his face. It's just a seat, just a detail. Don't make a scene. I blinked, stunned. 9 hours through a storm, I said, my voice rising, and this is all I get? His expression hardened. He leaned closer, his tone cold. You always overreact. Don't ruin my wedding. The words cut sharper than whispers ever could. Not gossip, not sideways glances, but his voice, louder than the music, louder than the clinking glasses. My humiliation wasn't subtle anymore. It was declared, made public by the very person I had come to honor. I stared at him, my mouth dry, unable to form a reply. He had dismissed me, reduced me, erased me with casual cruelty, and for the first time I realized he believed it. To him, I really was the problem, not the wound. Don't ruin my wedding. The sentence rang in my ears. He hadn't thought about my drive, my effort, my gift. He had thought only about himself, about appearances. I steadied my breathing, refusing to let my tears show. I told myself silently, he thinks my silence is weakness. He has no idea it's the beginning of my strength. I smoothed the coat on my lap, then folded it across my arm. I straightened my back, my chin lifting. I would not crumble for him. Not anymore. The ballroom still glittered, but to me it already looked cracked, as if the chandeliers were swinging slightly, the flowers wilting. I saw the illusion for what it was, a palace built on my exclusion. I reminded myself of something I once read in a paperback book. Respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that no longer serves you. Pain still coursed through me, but it wasn't hollow anymore. It mixed with strength, with resolve. I would leave, but not as the broken girl they thought I was. I placed my napkin carefully on the table, smoothing it flat with deliberate calm. The chair scraped back against the floor, louder this time, the sound sharp enough to draw heads around. They wanted me invisible, I thought, rising to my feet. I'm about to make sure the whole room sees me. The scrape of my chair echoed through the ballroom like a blade pulled from its sheath. I rose slowly, feeling every eye turn toward me, whispers rippling through the air. My coat slid across my arm, heavy like armor, my palms steady now despite the storm raging inside. For years, I had trained myself to stay seated, to stay silent. But tonight, humiliation had transformed into something else, resolve. If they want me to disappear, I thought, lifting my chin, I'll leave so loudly they'll never forget it. I stepped forward, each stride carrying me out of invisibility. My sister glanced briefly in my direction from the head table, her face lit with adoration from those around her. She turned back almost immediately, as though my rising from that folding chair was just another background detail, nothing that could compete with the glow of her spotlight. But with every step, my presence grew. Guests shifted uneasily, some leaning into one another. The chandeliers glittered above us, but my footsteps on the polished floor carried heavier than the music. Then came the voice, my brother's. "She's always dramatic," he called across the room, irritation sharp in his tone. "Just ignore her." Gasps spread like a wave, heads snapping between him and me. I stopped mid-step, turned slowly, and locked eyes with him. My voice was low but clear, carrying across the hushed room. "You call it dramatic. I call it survival." A stunned silence fell. My words hung there, heavier than his dismissal. His face stiffened, his smile faltering as whispers hissed at tables nearby. He tried to recover, raising his glass with forced laughter. "It's her way, always making things bigger than they are." I didn't let him finish. "9 hours in a snowstorm," I said, my voice rising. "Months of saving for a gift you erased. A lifetime of being pushed aside. And still, I showed up. For you." "Tell me, which part of that is dramatic?" The hall went still. I could feel hearts pounding around me, the collective tension pressing against the walls. Inside, my thoughts sharpened into steel. He thought those words would silence me. Instead, he gave me the stage. I shifted my coat across my arm and continued walking. This time, the crowd parted on its own. The center aisle stretched ahead, chandeliers glowing like spotlights, the polished wood floor gleaming beneath my heels. Guests edged back, forming an unspoken corridor. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared, mouths slightly open. I heard murmurs as I passed. "She's the sister. They put her by the toilet." Can you believe it? 9 hours in a storm and they put her there? The words no longer burned. They fueled me. My humiliation was no longer private. It was public record, etched into the minds of every person in that ballroom. I walked tall, though tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. My throat ached, but my shoulders squared. The coat over my arm felt less like fabric now, and more like a shield. Step after step, I moved through the silence that stretched between the tables. The music faltered, the quartet stopping mid-song as though even they couldn't continue under the weight of what had broken open. At the far end of the room, the heavy doors loomed. I reached them without hurry, every second pulling the room tighter into my orbit. I pressed a hand against the brass handle and pushed. The doors swung outward, and cold December air rushed in, sharp and clean, compared to the suffocating perfume of the hall. Snowflakes stung my cheeks immediately, the wind biting into my skin, and yet I breathed freely for the first time that night. Better the storm outside, I thought, stepping into the swirling snow, than the storm they've kept me in my whole life. The blizzard didn't feel hostile. It felt honest. The cold cut deep, but it was real. Unlike the warmth of the ballroom, which had always frozen me out, I pulled my coat around me and let the wind whip my hair. My shoes sank into the snow, each step swallowed quickly by white, but I no longer felt lost. "They think this is the end of me," I whispered, the words stolen by the wind. A faint smile tugged at my lips despite the sting of snow on my face. They're wrong. The morning after, I woke to the shrill vibration of my phone rattling against the nightstand. At first, I thought it was just one of those early marketing alerts, but when I reached over, the screen glowed with dozens of notifications stacked on top of each other. Texts, missed calls, group chat explosions. My hands shook slightly as I scrolled. Names of relatives, coworkers, even old friends lit up across the screen. I hadn't spoken to some of them in years. I sat up in bed, pulling the blanket around my shoulders as the cold seeped through the window pane. When I opened one of the messages, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just talk. It was a picture of me, or rather, the place they had put me, the folding chair, the crooked sticker that read "Table Overflow." Someone had posted it online with a caption that sliced through me and vindicated me all at once. This is how the bride seated her own sister after she drove 9 hours in a snowstorm. For a moment, I couldn't move. The image of that chair, bathed in the dim light by the restroom, was now alive on the internet. The humiliation I had carried privately was no longer locked inside me. It was visible to the world. My fingers trembled as I whispered, "I didn't have to speak." The picture spoke louder than anything I could say. Ping after ping rattled through. Shares, comments, angry emojis. The chair that once stood ignored in a corner was now a permanent record, floating endlessly, indestructible. I scrolled faster, my heart racing as though I were still driving the storm roads. Post after post, people were reacting, resharing, demanding answers. The truth was out, and it spread like fire in dry fields. Clips began to appear across my feed. Guests had filmed, murmuring behind their phones as they captured where I sat. Their voices carried now, stronger with the weight of public ears. One video had two women whispering, the camera zoomed in on me sipping water. "We froze when we saw her there," the first voice said. "It was humiliating." "I'll never forget her face," the second added. "She didn't belong by the restroom." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. They didn't cut this time. They healed, in a strange way, because they weren't mine alone anymore. My story was no longer just mine to hold. It was validated, repeated, amplified by strangers who bore witness. Another clip showed the moment I had pushed the chair back, the sound sharp against the floor. Over it, a comment read, "That sound? That's the sound of dignity refusing to stay down." I laughed quietly to myself, a laugh that was part disbelief, part relief. What I had thought was a silent act was now replayed again and again, millions of times, proof that silence can roar. Scrolling, I felt both exposed and supported. My humiliation had become a mirror for others. Their comments turned my private pain into public outrage, each voice a layer added to the truth. Then came the post that made me stop breathing. A name I recognized, Leora, one of the older guests I'd barely noticed at the wedding, had written on the viral thread. Her words were simple but carried the weight of judgment. I was there. I looked at her and thought, how can a family do this to their own? I read it again, slower this time. My throat tightened, tears filling my eyes before I could fight them back. It wasn't just sympathy, it was moral judgment. She wasn't excusing, she wasn't rationalizing, she was condemning them. For the first time, someone had said what I had always wished someone would say. As I scrolled further, I saw her comment being quoted, reposted, screen captured, and shared again and again. It became the sentence people clung to, the line that spread like wildfire across platforms. "She's right," one commenter added. "This isn't just seating, it's cruelty." "Family is supposed to protect you, not humiliate you," another wrote. I pressed a hand to my chest, whispering to myself, maybe the world sees me now. The echo of her words lingered, not just for me, but for everyone reading. The power of her moral clarity cut deeper than any toast that had been raised at that wedding. It was no longer a story about a seat. It was a story about worth, about dignity, about betrayal written into public record. Hours passed as I sat curled on my couch, the light outside shifting from morning gray to the pale wash of afternoon. A mug of coffee steamed between my hands as I scrolled endlessly. Relief warred with dread. They can't erase me now, I thought. But what will they do to me because of this? The storm outside rattled the windows, snow still blowing across the streets. I stared at it and saw my phone's screen in its reflection, chaotic, unrelenting, fierce. The storm outside mirrored the one in my hand. As I set the mug down, another notification popped up at the top of the screen. My mother's name. I froze. The world may have believed me now, but my family would never forgive me for it. The phone buzzed again and again until I finally swiped to answer. My mother's voice sliced through the line before I could say a word. "Do you know what you've done?" she snapped, every syllable trembling with restrained rage. "Your father's colleagues saw that photo. You've humiliated us." I sat up straighter on my couch, my free hand gripping the coffee mug tightly. "No," I said calmly, though my chest burned. "I showed them the truth. You humiliated yourselves when you let it happen." There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath on her end. "Don't twist this back on us. Families don't air dirty laundry. You've dragged us into the gutter in front of the entire world." I closed my eyes, breathing through the heat rising in me. Family is supposed to lift you up, Not bury you under their shame, I said, each word deliberate. Her tone sharpened. Do you hear yourself? You sound ungrateful, vindictive. Your sister's day was ruined because of you. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Her day was ruined the moment she decided my place was next to the restroom. That picture isn't my betrayal, it's my survival. The volley continued, words shot back and forth like arrows. Her fury circled reputation, appearances, respectability. Mine was anchored in the years of silence, the ache of invisibility. By the time I ended the call, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. The buzzing phone felt like a chain, and hanging up felt like cutting the link. I opened the family group chat, and what I saw almost made me drop the phone. Message after message poured in, dozens, each stacked on the other, relentless. Uncle. We all have disagreements. You made it into a circus. Aunt. You should have stayed quiet. Families keep things inside. Cousin. How dare you embarrass us like that? Do you hate us so much? My jaw clenched. They weren't defending me. They weren't questioning what had been done. They were furious only because I hadn't kept their secret. Scrolling further, the accusations blurred together. Betrayal, ungrateful, overdramatic. The words repeated, pounding like fists against my ribs. I typed nothing back. Instead, I stared at the screen, realizing what it had become. The group chat was a courtroom, and I was both defendant and accused, their verdict already written. Anger simmered beneath my skin. They didn't want truth. They wanted silence. They wanted me to carry the humiliation quietly so the family name could stay polished. But polished with what? With my erasure. I tossed the phone onto the couch, pacing the length of my living room. My chest rose and fell, fury giving way to resolve. Then, another ping caught my attention. A video link. I opened it with hesitation, but what appeared made me sink back into the cushions. It was a TikTok clip, already gathering thousands of views. Seraphine, the influencer guest I barely noticed at the wedding, had filmed me sitting in that chair, the words table overflow visible in cruel clarity. The overlay text burned across the screen. Imagine driving 9 hours in a snowstorm for this. My hand flew to my mouth as I watched. The angle, the framing, it was impossible to deny what it showed. I wasn't just seated poorly, I was discarded. And then I saw the comments pouring in. She deserved better. That family's cruel. This broke my heart. How could they? I kept scrolling, more and more appearing with every refresh. For once, strangers sided with me. The narrative was no longer under their control. The clip was undeniable, a mirror they couldn't shatter, no matter how they tried. I leaned back, pressing my head against the wall, letting the tide of vindication wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel crazy. I didn't feel like I had imagined it. The world saw what I had seen. The world named it what it was. Cruelty. The firestorm grew. Shares multiplied. Hashtags spread. People debated openly in comment threads. Some wrote of their own experiences. Others demanded accountability. My humiliation had become a symbol, and oddly, it didn't break me. It steadied me. At last, I set the phone down on the coffee table. The apartment around me was quiet, almost too quiet compared to the chaos flooding my screen. I exhaled, exhausted but strangely calm. They wanted to bury me in silence, I thought. Instead, the world heard me. The truth was heavier than I expected, but it carried a strange relief. Grim satisfaction, tinged with sorrow for the family I had lost long before this night. The empty apartment around me felt freer than the gilded ballroom ever had. The absence of their voices was not loneliness, it was liberation. I closed my eyes, letting the silence embrace me. The storm outside rattled the windows, but it couldn't touch me here. The phone buzzed again, breaking the calm. I reached for it reluctantly. This time, it wasn't the group chat or my mother. It was my sister, a text message blinking at the top of the screen. My breath caught. She had been silent until now. What could she possibly say after all this? I wondered aloud, my pulse quickening. The text from my sister sat on my phone for hours before I opened it. I stared at the screen, debating whether I wanted to hear what she had to say. Part of me hoped she might admit fault, maybe even whisper an apology in the form of typed words. But when I finally swiped to read, the message was blunt, almost cruel in its simplicity. You didn't have to do this. You ruined everything. Can't you just apologize and let it go? I read it twice, 3 times, my thumb hovering over the screen. No acknowledgement of what had been done to me, no recognition of my humiliation, just blame. Even now, after all of it, she still saw me as the problem. I dropped the phone into my lap, exhaustion washing over me. Guilt tried to creep in, the familiar guilt I'd carried for years. If I'd just been easier, quieter, less demanding, maybe things would have been different, but I pushed it aside. That guilt wasn't mine to carry anymore. She still doesn't see it, I whispered to the empty room. She'll never see it. Her words lingered like smoke in my chest, bitter and heavy. I let them burn until all that remained was resolve. I reopened the family group chat, and the flood of messages nearly blinded me. They came one after another, rapid fire, piling higher by the minute. You've disgraced us. We raised you better than this. Say sorry to your sister. Aunt Carol chimed in. This family is built on loyalty. You betrayed it. Uncle Dan followed quickly. Apologize now or you'll regret it. Regret it? My jaw tightened. Their words felt less like family and more like threats, a tribunal where the verdict had already been written. I stared at the lines of text, each one a blow meant to force me back into submission. The group chat wasn't just communication anymore. It was a courtroom, and I was both defendant and guilty party. They didn't want the truth. They wanted silence. I typed nothing. I simply scrolled, letting the waves of accusation crash over me until something inside clicked into place. This isn't loyalty, I thought, my pulse steadying. This is control. The realization was strangely liberating. The system I'd been raised in wasn't family in the truest sense. It was a machine, one that ran on my silence, and I was done fueling it. A knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. I rose, cautiously peering through the peephole. A delivery man stood there, his cap pulled low, a large box balanced on his dolly. "Delivery for you," he said, pushing it toward me. I opened the door, my stomach sinking as soon as I recognized the box. The espresso machine. My gift. He slid it inside without ceremony, tipping his cap. No note, just the return. I thanked him faintly and closed the door. The box loomed in the middle of my living room, heavier now than it had been the day I carried it into the ballroom. There was no card, no explanation. Just rejection, shoved back into my hands as if to erase any trace of my effort, my sacrifice. For a moment, the ache threatened to consume me, but then something unexpected bubbled up, a laugh, bitter, sharp, but real. "They think this hurts me," I said aloud, shaking my head, "but it frees me." I walked around the box slowly, hands on my hips, the sting transforming into something steadier. They had taken the last symbol I'd given them and thrown it back. But in doing so, they had handed me clarity. Sometimes rejection isn't the end. Sometimes rejection is the universe's way of saying, you're better off without them. I left the machine where it sat, untouched. That night, I placed it in the corner of my apartment, a monument to everything I was leaving behind. I didn't unpack it, didn't plug it in. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about the reminder of where I'd been and where I would never return. I stood in front of it for a long time, whispering to myself, I will never again beg for a seat at their table. The words felt final, sharp, and freeing. I realized then that independence didn't come from their acceptance. It came from my refusal to need it. I turned off my phone completely, the screen going black as the group chat, the accusations, the endless demands vanished into silence. It wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my freedom. The weeks that followed were heavy with silence, but for the first time, it was a silence I chose. No buzzing phones, no group chats erupting like firestorms. Just me, my small Albany studio, and a canvas waiting to be filled. I spent late nights hunched over sketches, coffee growing cold beside me, my hands tracing the same outline again and again, the folding chair, the crooked sticker, the corner by the restroom that had become my stage of shame. But this time, the chair wasn't drawn in humiliation. I reimagined it, transformed it. I made it a symbol of survival, of persistence against erasure. Each line steadied me, each brushstroke reclaimed something I thought I had lost. I poured every ache, every dismissal, every quiet vow into the canvas. The chair grew not smaller, but larger, looming like an altar. Around it, I painted empty tables, shadows of people with blurred faces, reminding me of all the times I was overlooked. A phrase I had once stumbled upon returned to me. Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Cesar Cruz's words. They guided my hands. The disturbed, the ones who had been silenced, would see comfort in my work, and the comfortable, the ones who sat at golden tables while I sat by toilets, would feel the sting. This was no longer about them, it was about me reclaiming the story. The night of the exhibition arrived in New York City. I stood at the back of the gallery, palms damp, coat draped over my arm the same way it had been that night at the wedding. But this time, the weight wasn't shame, it was strength. The centerpiece loomed in the middle of the room, a massive print of the toilet chair, the sticker table overflow, stark and undeniable. Around it, my paintings of empty seats glowed beneath bright lights, each one carrying the ghost of exclusion. Guests moved slowly at first, whispering. A stunned silence filled the space. Then applause erupted, hesitant at first, then rolling through the gallery like thunder. I overheard voices as people clustered near the centerpiece. She turned cruelty into art, one woman said, shaking her head. Another muttered, that family will never live this down. I closed my eyes, letting their words wash over me. Vindication surged, not because I had embarrassed them, but because I had reclaimed myself. The gallery lights shone down on the chair, just as chandeliers once had. But this time, I was not in the shadows. I was at the center. Within days, word spread. Local papers ran the story. Blogs featured photos of the exhibit, headlines sharp and unrelenting. The overflow chair, one woman's fight for recognition. Online, the memes multiplied. My sister's perfect bride image cracked under the weight of public opinion. Screenshots of the chair appeared beside glossy wedding photos, the contrast impossible to ignore. And my family? Silent. They refused to attend, refused to respond. But their silence was louder than any defense they might have offered. It was their defeat, public and undeniable. One evening, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I watched the name flash across the screen. For a moment, I almost answered out of habit, but then I pressed decline and set it back on the table. That unanswered call was more final, more liberating than any confrontation. The phone stopped being a chain. At home later, I made myself a cup of coffee, using the espresso machine they had shoved back into my hands. I placed it proudly on my counter, no longer a reminder of rejection, but of resilience. I sat down with the mug, savoring the warmth. Closing my eyes, I whispered, "They gave me a toilet chair. I chose my throne." For the first time in years, my body felt light. That night, I returned to my studio to lock up after the gallery closed. The streets were quiet, snow crunching beneath my boots. I turned the key and glanced back through the large glass window. My art glowed from within. The chair transformed into something untouchable, undeniable. This is not the end, I thought, a calm smile spreading across my face. It's only the beginning of my story.